The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Marcus Chon walked to the center platform. His worn leather briefcase looked absurdly primitive against the holographic displays and quantum processors that lined the vast circular room. 47 species watched him with varying degrees of curiosity, contempt, and confusion. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 3 standard cycles, and already they were requesting an audience with the full council. It was unprecedented. The Vraxian Supreme Commander, a creature resembling a crystalline mantis, standing 12 feet tall, clicked his mandibles in what passed for amusement among his kind. The human delegation has requested this assembly. We have granted it, though we question the wisdom of allocating council time to such a young species. Speak, human. What matter requires the attention of 47 civilizations? Marcus set his briefcase on the transparent podium and looked around the chamber with calm, measured eyes. He had been a hostage negotiator in Chicago for 15 years before humanity made first contact. Now he was Earth's primary representative to species that could vaporize his home planet without breaking stride. The job requirements, he found, were surprisingly similar. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. I'm here to discuss the current conflict between the Zellner hegemony and the Crete Collective. A war that has lasted 43 cycles and cost approximately 12 billion lives across 17 star systems. The Zellner representative, a being of pure energy contained in a geometric field, pulsed with irritation. This conflict is none of Earth's concern. Your species lacks the military capacity to even traverse the neutral zones where this war is fought. Why do you waste our time? Because, Marcus replied, pulling a simple paper notebook from his briefcase, I believe I can end it. The chamber erupted. Laughter, in various frequencies and forms, echoed off the walls. The Crete ambassador, a tentacled creature suspended in a mobility sphere filled with ammonia, rippled with what the translation matrix interpreted as scornful dismissal. Humanity possesses no weapons capable of forcing either of our civilizations into submission. Your entire species commands fewer than 200 warships. The hegemony alone maintains a standing fleet of 80,000. Marcus waited for the noise to die down. This was the part he'd practiced. In hostage negotiations, the first rule was simple. Let them talk themselves out. Let them think they understood the situation. Then show them they didn't. You're absolutely right, he said, flipping open his notebook. Humanity cannot threaten either of you militarily. We can't force you to do anything. But that's not what I'm offering. I'm offering to help you stop. The Vraxian commander leaned forward, his interest genuinely piqued now. Explain. Marcus walked slowly around the platform as he spoke, making eye contact with various delegates. I've spent the last 2 cycles studying your war. Not the military aspects. I'm not qualified for that. But the reasons behind it. The history. The actual points of contention. He paused. Would you like to know what I found? No one answered, but every sensor, eye, and consciousness in the room focused on him. Neither of you actually remembers why you started fighting, Marcus continued. Oh, you both have official histories. The Zellner claimed the Crete violated territorial boundaries in the Helian expanse. The Crete insist the Zellner fired first on a civilian mining operation. But here's the interesting part. I found 73 different versions of these events in your own historical databases. 73. They all contradict each other? The Zellner representative flickered. Historical inconsistencies do not change the reality of Crete aggression. And Zellner treachery is well documented, the Crete ambassador added, tentacles writhing. Is it? Marcus asked quietly. He pulled a data chip from his notebook and held it up. This contains analysis performed by Earth's historical A is primitive by your standards. I know, but unbiased. They found something remarkable. Both of your species have been manipulated. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. The Vraxian commander's mandibles stopped clicking. Manipulated? By whom? By yourselves, Marcus said. Not intentionally. But 43 cycles ago, both of your governments were facing internal problems. Economic downturns, political scandals, social unrest. A minor border incident became useful. A way to unite your populations. Rally around the flag, as we say on Earth. But neither of you actually wanted a real war. You just wanted the appearance of one. Preposterous, the Crete ambassador hissed. We have lost billions. You have, Marcus agreed, his voice gentle now. Because what started as political theater became real. Pride got involved. Neither side could back down without looking weak. Every battle demanded revenge. Every loss required retaliation. The original incident, whatever it really was, stopped mattering cycles ago. Now you're fighting because you've been fighting. Because stopping would mean admitting all those deaths were for nothing. The silence that followed was different now, heavier. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Marcus pressed on. In my old job, I dealt with people who'd backed themselves into corners. People who'd made terrible decisions and couldn't see a way out that didn't destroy them. The key was never forcing them to surrender. It was showing them a door they hadn't seen. A way to stop that let them keep their dignity. And you believe you have found such a door for us? The Zellner representative asked, their energy field dimming slightly. I have, Marcus said. He placed his data chip on the podium. But first, I need to share something humanity learned the hard way. We spent most of our history fighting each other. Wars over resources, religions, ideologies, insults both real and imagined. We were very good at starting fights. Terrible at ending them. He looked directly at the Zellner and Crete representatives. Do you know what finally changed? Not weapons. Not threats. We learned to ask a different question. Not how do we win, but what does winning actually look like? Because if winning means the complete destruction of your enemy, then you've already lost something essential. You've lost a future where both of you exist. The Crete ambassador's tentacles stilled. You speak of compromise as though it were simple. It's not simple, Marcus admitted. It's the hardest thing there is. But it's possible. I've mapped out a framework. 17 points that address the actual current grievances, not the historical ones that no one can agree on, but the real problems that exist right now. Territory disputes. Trade route access. Prisoner exchanges. War reparations structured so neither economy collapses. 17 points, the Zellner representative repeated. You truly believe. I don't believe anything, Marcus interrupted gently. I'm offering you a choice. You can keep fighting. In another 43 cycles, maybe one of you wins. Maybe you both lose. Or you can try something my species calls negotiation. Real negotiation. Not demands and ultimatums, but actual dialogue. The Vraxian commander stood, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. The human makes an interesting proposal, but negotiation requires trust. There is no trust between the hegemony and the collective. Marcus smiled then, a very human expression that didn't translate well, but somehow conveyed its meaning anyway. That's why I'm here. You don't have to trust each other. Not yet. You just have to trust that a primitive species with 200 warships has absolutely nothing to gain from lying to you. We're not strong enough to matter in your war. But maybe that's exactly why we can help end it. He picked up his briefcase. The data chip contains everything. Read it. Think about it. When you're ready to talk humanity, we'll host the negotiations. Neutral ground. No weapons. No fleets. Just representatives in a room, trying to find a way forward that doesn't require anyone else to die. As Marcus walked toward the exit, the Crete ambassador called out, "And if we refuse? If we choose to continue as we are?" Marcus paused and turned back. "Then you continue. Humanity won't interfere. We're too small, too weak, too new to this galaxy to force anything. But I'll leave you with one last thought from my old job. The people who couldn't walk away from bad situations, they weren't the ones who lacked strength. They were the ones who couldn't imagine something different. Don't let that be you." The chamber doors closed behind him. Inside, 47 species sat in contemplative silence, each considering the words of a species barely capable of crossing their own star system. The Zellner and Crete representatives stared at the data chip sitting on the podium, neither moving toward it, neither moving away. The war wouldn't end that day. But something had shifted. A human with a leather briefcase and a notebook had done what the galaxy's mightiest civilizations couldn't. He'd made them stop and think about what they were actually fighting for. Ambassador Marcus. Chun walked through the council station's corridors alone, hoping his gamble would pay off. In hostage negotiations, you never really knew if your words had worked until the moment someone finally put down their weapon. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they didn't. But you always had to try, because the alternative was watching people destroy themselves over conflicts they've forgotten how to escape. And that, Marcus thought, was something worth negotiating against. The communication came 3 days later, not from the Galactic Council, but directly from the Zellner hegemony. Then, an hour after that, from the Crete Collective. Both messages said essentially the same thing. They were willing to hear more about humanity's proposal. Neither mentioned the other's agreement. Marcus suspected neither knew the other had responded. That was good. It meant they were curious enough to risk looking interested. In his old job, that was the moment when the hostage-taker started peeking through the curtains, wondering if the negotiator outside might actually have a way out. Earth's delegation arrived at station Kepler 442 2 weeks later. The station was humanity's largest space construction project, a diplomatic outpost built specifically for this purpose, orbiting a gas giant in neutral space. It wasn't impressive by galactic standards. Most alien species could construct something similar in a matter of days. It had taken Earth's combined industrial capacity 6 months, but that was the point. The station was deliberately modest, non-threatening, a place where species with planet-destroying weapons could sit down without anyone feeling outgunned. Marcus stood in the main conference room, arranging simple wooden chairs around a circular table. His assistant, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, watched with amusement. She'd been a conflict resolution specialist at the United Nations before the aliens arrived. Now she was helping prepare for the galaxy's most dangerous peace talk. "They're going to think we're insane," Sarah said. "Wooden furniture, paper documents. Half the species coming can't even sit in chairs. Then they'll stand or float or whatever they do," Marcus replied, adjusting a chair slightly. "The point is to make this feel different from every other negotiation they've ever had. No quantum processors, no holographic displays, no technology that could be secretly recording or transmitting. Just beings in a room talking. And you really think the Zellner and Crete will accept these conditions?" Marcus smiled. "They already have. They're desperate, Sarah. They'd never admit it, but 43 cycles of war has exhausted them both. Their economies are collapsing. Their populations are tired. They just need someone to blame the peace on besides themselves." The door opened and Commander Patricia Hayes entered, her military uniform crisp despite the station's modest gravity. She'd commanded Earth's defense fleet during the nervous early days after first contact. Now she was here as a security consultant, though her role was more symbolic than practical. If the Zellner or Crete wanted to destroy the station, Earth's few dozen guards wouldn't stop them. Both delegations have arrived, Hayes reported. The Zellner brought 12 representatives. The Crete brought 15. Both have battle fleets waiting 2 systems away, just in case. Of course they do, Marcus said. Would you come to negotiations with an enemy without backup? I wouldn't come to negotiations with an enemy at all, Hayes replied. I'd prepare for war. That's why you're military and I'm a negotiator, Marcus said without rancor. Sometimes talking is harder than fighting. Fighting has clear rules. You win or you lose. Talking means accepting that maybe nobody wins everything, and that's harder for soldiers to accept. Hayes bristled slightly, then relaxed. You're right. I don't understand how this works. But I hope you do, because if this goes wrong, those battle fleets are going to turn this entire sector into a debris field. The first session began 2 hours later. The conference room had been modified to accommodate different physiologies. The Zellner representative, who called herself Lumine, hovered in her containment field at one end of the table. The Crete delegation, led by an elder named Thresk, occupied specially prepared tanks along the opposite side. Between them sat representatives from 6 neutral species who'd volunteered to witness the negotiations, and at the head of the table sat Marcus, with his leather briefcase and paper notebook, looking impossibly small compared to the beings around him. Thank you all for coming, Marcus began. I know this wasn't easy for anyone. The Zellner and Crete have been enemies for longer than my entire species has been in space. To sit in the same room requires courage. Lumine's energy field pulsed. We are here because you made certain claims, human. Claims that our war is based on misunderstandings and political convenience. We wish to hear your evidence. And if your evidence is insufficient, Thresk added, his tentacles riding in the ammonia, then this is a waste of our time. Time that could be spent defending our people from Zellner aggression. There is no Zellner aggression, Lumine flared. Only Zellner defense against Crete expansion. See, this is interesting, Marcus interrupted before the argument could escalate. You both just did something revealing. You both stated your position as absolute truth. Zellner defense. Crete expansion. But truth isn't actually what we're here to discuss. Then what are we discussing? Thresk demanded. The future, Marcus said simply. He opened his notebook. Can I tell you about a war my species fought? It was called World War I. Started over the assassination of one person. Before it ended, 17 million people were dead. Empires collapsed. Maps were redrawn. And when it was over, do you know what everyone asked? The room was silent. They asked, what did we win? Marcus continued, because nobody could really answer that. The territory gained wasn't worth the cost. The political objectives had become meaningless. They'd fought for 4 years, and nobody could really explain why anymore. Are you comparing our sacred duty to defend our people to some primitive human conflict? Lumine asked, but there was less hostility in her tone now. More uncertainty. I'm saying that all wars eventually reach a point where winning and losing stop meaning what they meant at the start, Marcus replied. Your original conflict was about a border incident in the Helian Expanse, right? Well, the Helian Expanse doesn't exist anymore. It was destroyed in Cycle 16 of your war. Both of your fleets bombarded it until nothing remained but asteroids. So what are you fighting over now? Thresk's tentacles stilled. The principle. The Zellner must acknowledge their initial transgression, and the Crete must admit to their territorial violations, Lumine added. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Okay, let's say I could give you that. Let's say I had a recording from 43 cycles ago that showed exactly what happened. Clear, undeniable proof of who fired first, who violated what treaty, who lied about which detail. Would you actually want to see it? The question hung in the air, Around the table, the neutral observers shifted uncomfortably. This was dangerous ground. Of course we would, Lumine said, but her energy field flickered uncertainly. Would you? Marcus pressed. Because here's what happens next. Either the recording proves you right, which means the Crete would have to admit they spent 43 cycles fighting for a lie. Billions of their people died for nothing. Or it proves you wrong, which means the same thing happens to you. Either way, one of you has to accept that your entire civilization has been killing and dying based on a mistake. Sarah, sitting beside Marcus, added quietly, "Can any government survive that revelation? Can any leader tell their people that truth and remain in power?" The silence stretched longer now. Thresk and Lumine both seemed unable to respond, each likely doing calculations about political survival versus righteous vindication. "This is why I'm not here to discuss the past," Marcus said. "The past is a weapon you'll use to destroy each other. I'm here to talk about what happens tomorrow. Next cycle. 10 cycles from now. Because right now, you're both losing." "The hegemony is not losing," Lumine insisted. "Neither is the collective," Thresk said. "Really?" Marcus pulled out a datapad, a concession to technology he'd allowed himself. "Zellner economy has contracted by 42% since the war began. Your population is in decline. 17 colony worlds have petitioned for independence because they're tired of wartime rationing. Crete, your situation is worse. 51% economic contraction. 3 major rebellions in the last cycle alone. Both of your militaries are running on conscripts now because volunteers dried up decades ago." He set the pad down. "You're not winning. You're bleeding. And the longer this continues, the weaker you both become. Eventually, some third party, maybe the Vraxian, maybe someone else, will decide you're both vulnerable enough to absorb. Then you'll have lost everything. Not to each other, but to someone who wasn't even part of your fight." One of the neutral observers, a Talaxian diplomat, spoke up. "The human makes a valid strategic point. Prolonged conflict invites opportunistic intervention. So what do you propose?" Lumine asked. "Unconditional surrender? The hegemony will never—" "I'm not proposing surrender," Marcus interrupted. "I'm proposing something much harder. I'm proposing that both of you win." "Impossible," Thresk said. "Wars have winners and losers." Marcus smiled. "That's what everyone thinks. But it's not true. Let me show you something humanity learned." He pulled out paper copies of his 17-point framework and distributed them around the table. "These points address current issues. Not historical grievances, but actual problems that exist right now." He walked them through it. Territory disputes resolved by establishing joint administration zones. Trade routes open to both species with shared security arrangements. Prisoners of war exchanged in stages, with neutral observers monitoring treatment. War reparations structured as mutual economic DA. The back-channel communications started 3 days after the first session. Not official diplomatic messages, but quiet inquiries from lower-level Zellner and Crete officials. They wanted to know if humanity was serious. If Marcus really thought this could work. If there were hidden conditions or secret alliances. Marcus answered each query the same way. Humanity wanted nothing except to stop watching billions of beings kill each other over a conflict neither side could win. Some believed him. Others thought it was an elaborate trap. But they all kept talking, which was what mattered. The second session convened 2 weeks later. This time, both delegations brought additional representatives, economic advisors, military strategists, and what Marcus suspected were intelligence operatives. The room felt more crowded, more tense. Money and power were at stake now, not just principles. "We have concerns about your proposal," Lumine began without preamble. "Specifically regarding the joint administration zones. The hegemony cannot share sovereignty over territories we have defended with the lives of millions. The collective has similar concerns, Thresk added. These zones were Crete space before the war. We do not accept permanent partition. Marcus had expected this. Territorial disputes were always the hardest part. People could forgive insults, even casualties, more easily than they could accept losing land. It was something primal, coded deep into species psychology, probably any species that evolved from territorial creatures. Let me ask you both something, Marcus said. What do you actually do with the territories you're fighting over? The ones that haven't been destroyed yet. Luminay's energy field pulsed with confusion. They are part of the hegemony. They contribute to our civilization. Specifically how? Marcus pressed. What resources do they provide? What economic value? A Zellner economic advisor, a smaller energy being named Corinth, answered. The contested territories contain mineral deposits, strategic military positions, and several habitable worlds. Their total economic output represents approximately 8% of hegemony gross production. And their cost? Sarah asked, pulling up data on her pad. Military expenditure to hold and defend these territories represents 23% of your total budget. You're spending nearly 3 times what they're worth to keep them. The calculation is similar for the collective, Marcus added, looking at the Crete delegation. You're bankrupting yourselves to hold territory that costs more than it produces. Why? Because if we withdraw, they will take it, Thresk said simply. We cannot show weakness. And if the hegemony withdraws, the collective will expand further, Luminay added. The strategic implications are based on the assumption that you'll always be enemies, Marcus interrupted. But what if you weren't? What if, instead of fighting over who owns these territories, you both used them? He pulled out a new document, handwritten in simple block letters, so it would be readable by all translation systems. Joint administration doesn't mean splitting ownership. It means creating something new. Economic zones where both Zellner and Crete companies can operate, where both governments collect taxes, where both militaries are prohibited. These zones become neutral ground, economically valuable to both of you, and too important to risk destroying in a new conflict. A Crete military advisor, a scarred veteran named Dren, spoke up. You are proposing we demilitarize strategic territory. That is tactically insane, is it? Commander Hayes interjected. She'd been quiet until now, but Marcus had asked her to be ready for this moment. From a military perspective, those territories are currently a resource drain. You maintain occupation forces, supply lines, defensive installations, all while under constant threat of attack. Demilitarizing them frees up those military assets for actual defense of your core territories. And if the other side violates the agreement? Dren challenged. If they secretly militarize while we honor the treaty? That's what the neutral observers are for, Sarah said. Point 9 of the framework establishes monitoring stations run by third-party species. The Talaxians have already volunteered. Any military buildup gets detected immediately, and the violating party faces Galactic Council sanctions. Sanctions? Luminay flickered with what might have been amusement. The Council has never been able to enforce anything against major powers. They haven't had a reason that serves their interests, Marcus corrected. But if you and the Crete both agree to this framework, and one of you violates it, suddenly every other Council species has a strong interest in enforcement. Because if treaty violations go unpunished, it threatens the stability they all depend on. He stood and walked to the room's single window, looking out at the gas giant below. Here's what nobody's saying out loud. You're not the only ones watching these negotiations. Half the galaxy is monitoring this station right now. The Vraxian, Gatorian sovereignty, the Hexerchate, everyone with a stake in galactic stability. They want you to stop fighting because your war is starting to destabilize trade routes, resource prices, and political alliances. Marcus turned back to face the room. If you both agree to peace, you'll have the most powerful species in the galaxy backing that peace. Not because they like you, but because stability serves their interests. That's a better guarantee than any military force you could deploy. A long silence followed. Finally, a junior Zellner diplomat named Veritas spoke. She'd been quiet during previous sessions, but Marcus had noticed her taking extensive notes. The human makes a compelling point about external enforcement. But this still requires both parties to trust the framework. Trust that has been destroyed by 43 cycles of conflict. You're right, Marcus agreed. Trust is broken. That's why we don't start with trust. We start with verification. Sarah distributed another document. Point 6 outlines a staged implementation. Phase 1 is a simple ceasefire in one contested system. Just one. Both sides pull back, neutral observers move in, and for 3 standard months, nothing happens. No fighting. No economic exploitation. Just peace on a small scale to prove it's possible. If that works, Marcus continued, we expand to another system. Then another. Each phase builds confidence without requiring either of you to risk everything at once. By the time we reach full implementation, you'll have 2 cycles of successful cooperation to build on. Thresk's tentacles waved in a pattern the translator interpreted as thoughtful consideration. And if Phase 1 fails? If incidents occur? Then we stop, analyze what went wrong, and adjust, Marcus said simply. This isn't a single all-or-nothing gamble. It's a process. Failures are expected and planned for. What matters is whether you're both committed to making it work. Another Crete advisor, an elderly female named Sessek, made a sound like grinding stones. The human speaks of commitment, but commitment requires motivation beyond fear of economic collapse. What does the collective gain from this peace beyond mere survival? It was the question Marcus had been waiting for. The real question. Not could they make peace, but why should they want to? What do you want your civilization to be remembered for? Marcus asked. In 1,000 cycles, when historians look back at the Crete collective, what do you want them to see? A species that fought bravely, but ultimately destroyed itself in an endless war? Or a species that had the wisdom to transform an enemy into a partner? He looked at both delegations. Right now, you're defining yourselves by this conflict. Every aspect of your cultures has been shaped by 43 cycles of war. Your economies, your politics, your art, your identity, it's all connected to fighting each other. But that's not who you are. It's just what you've been doing. Marcus sat back down, his voice softer now. Humanity fought 2 massive global wars. Millions died. We developed weapons capable of destroying our entire planet. And then we stopped. Not because we became weak, but because we realized we could be more than our conflicts. We could explore space, create art, solve problems, build things instead of destroying them. And now you presume to lecture us on our choices? Luminay's energy field crackled. No, Marcus said. I'm asking you to remember that you have choices. War isn't inevitable. It's a decision you make every day. And every day you choose something else is a day you might discover what your civilizations could become without it. Corinth, the Zellner economic advisor, spoke up hesitantly. There are projections, models my team has run. If hostilities ended and resources currently devoted to military production were reallocated to civilian development, the hegemony's economic growth could increase by factors we previously thought impossible, assuming the Crete made similar reallocations. A Crete scientist named Thorm added, the collective's research programs have been severely limited by wartime restrictions. Our brightest minds are designing better weapons instead of advancing knowledge. The potential for scientific achievement in peacetime. He trailed off, tentacles quivering with something that might have been longing. Marcus saw the opening. That's what you gain. Not just survival, but potential. The chance to be something more. And yes, it's risky. Yes, it requires trusting that the other side wants the same thing. But consider the alternative. Fight for another 43 cycles, lose billions more lives, drain your economies further, and end up in the same place you are now, except weaker and more vulnerable to everyone else. The break lasted 3 standard weeks. During that time, Marcus received exactly 0 official communications from either the Zellner or Crete governments. This was normal. Public silence while private debates raged. He'd learned to read the absence of messages as carefully as their presence. What did arrive were the unofficial signals. A Zellner cargo ship requesting permission to dock at Station Kepler for routine maintenance, even though the station had no maintenance facilities. A Crete civilian science vessel conducting mineral surveys in the nearby asteroid field. Both were obvious intelligence-gathering operations, but Marcus allowed them. Let them verify that humanity wasn't building secret weapons or plotting with their enemies. Transparency built trust faster than secrecy ever could. On the 18th day, Sarah burst into his office holding a datapad. "You need to see this. The Talaxian observers just intercepted something. A message between Junior Zellner and Crete diplomats. They're talking to each other directly, without going through official channels." Marcus read the translated message. It was careful, formal, but unmistakably real. A young Zellner named Veritas, the one who'd spoken up about trust, had reached out to a Crete named Thorm, the scientist who'd mentioned postponed research. They were discussing a joint xenobiology project that had been abandoned 42 cycles ago when the war started. "This is good," Marcus said quietly. "This is very good." "Good?" Sarah looked incredulous. "It's a massive breach of protocol. Both of them could be charged with treason by their governments." "Which is exactly why it's good," Marcus explained. "They're risking something real because they care more about the possibility of peace than about their careers. That kind of commitment is what changes things." Hayes, who'd been reviewing security reports at the corner desk, looked up. "Should we inform their governments about this unauthorized contact?" "Absolutely not," Marcus said immediately. "We pretend we never saw it. Let them think they're being clever and secretive. If this develops into something bigger, we can acknowledge it later. But right now, we protect them." The third session began exactly 3 weeks after the second had ended. The atmosphere in the conference room was different. Subtle, but Marcus had learned to read these shifts. Representatives sat slightly less rigidly. The hostile glances between delegations had softened to mere wariness. Small changes, but meaningful. Lumine spoke first. "The hegemony has considered your proposal. We have also compiled the list you suggested." She transmitted a data file to the room's central display. "These are projects and initiatives that have been postponed or canceled due to the war." The list was extensive. Scientific research stations, cultural preservation programs, terraforming initiatives, educational exchanges, economic development in underdeveloped systems. Hundreds of projects representing trillions of credits of investment and uncountable hours of labor. "The collective has also prepared such a list," Thresk said, transmitting his own file. The Crete list was similarly impressive. Deep space exploration missions, medical research facilities, infrastructure reconstruction in war-damaged colonies, arts and cultural renaissance programs. Marcus studied both lists quietly, letting the silence stretch. Around the table, delegates began examining the data. He watched as realizations slowly dawned on their faces. The lists weren't just similar, they were nearly identical in theme and scope. Both civilizations wanted the same things. They just couldn't have them while fighting each other. "I see considerable overlap," Veritas said carefully, her energy field dim with what might have been embarrassment or hope. The hegemony's proposed xenobiology research station would serve similar purposes to the collective's exobiology initiative. Indeed, Thorm agreed, his tentacles moving in what the translator marked as cautious interest. The methodologies differ, but the core objectives are nearly identical. Pooled resources could achieve more than either project separately. That's one project, Dren, the Crete military advisor, said skeptically. You're suggesting cooperation across all of these? Why not? Marcus asked. Look at your lists. Neither of you can afford to do everything on them while maintaining war economies. But if you reallocated military spending to civilian development, and if you collaborated instead of competed, you could accomplish most of these projects within a decade. A Zellner infrastructure specialist named Carrix flickered with agitation. Collaboration requires coordination, sharing facilities, data, resources. That creates vulnerability. The Crete could exploit civilian cooperation to gather military intelligence. As could the Zellner, a Crete security advisor countered. Trust remains the fundamental problem. Then let's talk about trust differently, Sarah interjected. She'd been preparing for this moment. You're thinking about trust as an all-or-nothing proposition. Either you trust completely, or you don't trust at all. But that's not how trust actually works in practice. She pulled up a presentation on the central display. Humanity rebuilt trust between former enemies using what we call graduated reciprocation. Small cooperative acts that prove reliability over time. You don't start by trusting each other with everything. You start by trusting each other with one thing. Something small, verifiable, and mutually beneficial. Marcus took over. Here's a concrete proposal. Point 17 of the framework suggests cultural exchanges, but let's make it specific. Both governments send scientific research teams to Station Kepler. Neutral ground. They work on one joint project, let's say that xenobiology station everyone's interested in. Small teams. Full transparency. Neutral observers monitoring everything. If the project succeeds, Sarah continued, both governments benefit from shared research. If it fails due to sabotage or exploitation, everyone sees exactly who violated the agreement. Low risk, high visibility, and a clear test of whether cooperation is possible. Thresk's tentacles waved slowly. And if this test succeeds, what then? Then you add another project, Marcus said. And another. Each success builds confidence. Each collaboration creates relationships between your scientists, engineers, and civilians. People who see each other as colleagues instead of enemies. Within a few cycles, you'll have entire networks of cooperation that make war unthinkable because too many people have too much to lose. Luminay's energy field brightened. This is long-term strategic thinking, binding our civilizations together so thoroughly that conflict becomes impossible. That's the idea, Marcus agreed. The most stable peace isn't enforced by treaties or military deterrence. It's created by mutual investment in shared futures. When your civilizations are intertwined economically, scientifically, and culturally, war stops being a viable option. A senior Crete political advisor named Vesic, who'd been silent until now, spoke in a voice that carried weight. You are describing a transformation of our entire relationship with the Zellner, from enemies to partners. This is not negotiation. This is social engineering on a civilizational scale. Yes, Marcus said simply, because negotiating territorial boundaries or reparations payments isn't enough. Those are surface issues. The real problem is that both your societies are structured around being at war. Your economies depend on military production. Your political systems are organized around wartime governance. Your cultural identities are defined by the conflict. Ending the war requires transforming all of that. He stood and walked slowly around the table. I know it sounds impossible, but my species did it. After World War II, we had enemies who'd fought with unimaginable brutality. Nations that had tried to annihilate each other. And within a generation, they were allies. Not because they suddenly liked each other, but because they built so many connections that continuing as enemies would have been self-destructive. How long did this transformation take? Veritas asked quietly. 20 years for the major changes, Sarah replied. 50 years before the old grudges really faded. 100 years before the former enemies could look back and barely remember why they'd fought. It's not fast, but it works. Corinth, the Zellner economist, transmitted new calculations to the display. I have modeled the economic implications of the framework, plus these graduated cooperation initiatives. If implemented successfully, both economies could return to pre-war output levels within 15 standard cycles. Within 30 cycles, combined economic output would exceed anything either civilization achieved independently. That assumes perfect implementation, Dren objected. It assumes no violations, no conflicts, no political disruptions. It assumes problems will occur and be resolved, Corinth corrected. The model includes contingencies for disputes and setbacks. What it proves is that even with significant friction, cooperation produces better outcomes than continued conflict. Sesek, the elderly Crete advisor, made her grinding stone sound again. Numbers are persuasive, but they do not address the emotional reality. Millions have died. Both our peoples have suffered grievously. How do we ask them to accept partnership with those who killed their families? Marcus had been waiting for this question. It was the hardest one, the most human one, and it required the most honest answer. You don't ask them to forget, he said quietly. You don't ask them to forgive, not immediately. You ask them to choose the future over the past. To decide that the best way to honor those who died is to make sure no. The ceasefire announcement came 3 weeks later. Not in the contested territories, but in a single remote system that neither side particularly valued. It was a test, as Marcus had proposed, and therefore deliberately anticlimactic. No grand declarations. No promises of eternal peace. Just a simple statement. Military operations would cease in the Kelver system for a trial period of 3 standard months. Galactic reaction was skeptical. The Vraxian Supreme Commander publicly questioned whether humanity had accomplished anything meaningful. Several news networks projected the ceasefire would collapse within days. Betting markets across multiple species gave the peace framework less than a 5% chance of lasting a full cycle. Marcus ignored all of it. He'd learned long ago that public opinion didn't determine outcomes. Actions did. The real work happened in the weeks that followed. Teams of neutral observers, primarily Talaxian, but including representatives from 6 other species, deployed to the Kelver system. They established monitoring stations, verified both sides' military withdrawals, and began documenting compliance. Sarah coordinated the logistics from Station Kepler, managing what turned into a massive bureaucratic undertaking. Hundreds of reports. Thousands of verification protocols. Endless procedural debates. It was boring, tedious work, which was exactly what peace looked like up close. The first incident occurred on day 17 of the ceasefire. A Crete patrol vessel entered the neutral zone, claiming navigation system malfunction. Zellner forces detected the incursion immediately. Military commanders on both sides demanded authorization to respond. The ceasefire hung by a thread. Marcus got the emergency call at 3 in the morning, station time. He was in the conference room 20 minutes later, still wearing yesterday's clothes, with Luminae and Thresk appearing on holographic displays from their respective flagships. The violation is clear, Luminae said, her energy field crackling with agitation. Crete forces have entered the restricted zone. This demonstrates their bad faith. Our vessel experienced legitimate technical failure, Thresk countered, tentacles writhing. We notified neutral observers immediately and are withdrawing. The Zellner response is disproportionate. Stop, Marcus said quietly. Both representatives fell silent, surprised by his tone. This is the moment. Right now. You both have a choice. You can decide this incident means the ceasefire is over, return to war, and prove everyone right who said peace was impossible. Or you can do what the framework was designed for, resolve the incident and move forward. The human speaks of resolution, but the collective has violated. Lumine began. Point 11. Section 4. Marcus interrupted, pulling up the framework document. Procedures for handling violations. First, neutral observers investigate and determine if the violation was deliberate or accidental. Second, the violating party accepts consequences proportionate to intent. Third, both parties reaffirm commitment to the framework. That's the process. Follow it. Thresk's tentacles stilled. You would subject the collective to investigation? I would subject both of you to the rules you agreed to, Marcus replied. If the Talaxians determine your navigation failure was legitimate, you issue a formal apology and pay a nominal fine. If they find you deliberately tested the boundaries, the consequences are more severe. But either way, we follow the process instead of abandoning it the first time something goes wrong. A long silence. Ben Lumine pulsed with resignation. Very well. The hegemony accepts the investigation process. As does the collective, Thresk agreed reluctantly. The investigation took 4 days. The Talaxian observers conducted a forensic analysis of the Crete vessel, interviewed the crew, examined communication logs. Their final report concluded the navigation failure was legitimate, though it also noted the ship had been operating close enough to the boundary that such a failure was foreseeable. The Crete government issued a formal apology and paid the nominal fine. They also implemented new protocols to prevent similar incidents. The Zellner accepted both gestures. The ceasefire continued. Marcus filed the report in his growing collection of documents and breathed a sigh of relief. The framework had survived its first real test. Not because everyone behaved perfectly, but because when someone failed, the system handled it. The joint xenobiology project began 2 months later. Small teams, 4 Zellner scientists, 5 Crete researchers, and 3 human coordinators acting as neutral facilitators. They established a laboratory on Station Kepler and began studying comparative biology across species boundaries. Commander Hayes insisted on maintaining security protocols around the project, convinced it would be a prime target for sabotage. Marcus approved the measures, but privately doubted they'd be needed. People trying to sabotage the peace didn't usually wait until scientists were collaborating. They struck earlier, during the vulnerable political negotiations. He was right. The science teams began working together with cautious professionalism that gradually evolved into genuine collaboration. Thorm, the Crete scientist who'd lost offspring in the war, and Veritas, the young Zellner diplomat who'd become a research liaison, discovered they approached problems with complementary methodologies. Crete analytical frameworks combined with Zellner energy-based observations produced insights neither could have achieved alone. 6 months into the project, they published their first joint paper. It made minor waves in scientific circles and virtually no impression on the general public. Marcus celebrated anyway. It was proof that former enemies could create something together instead of destroying each other. The real breakthrough came during the 8th month of the ceasefire. A massive stellar phenomenon occurred in a system between Zellner and Crete space, a dying star undergoing unusual collapse patterns. Both civilizations had scientific interests in observing it, but neither wanted to risk military vessels near the other's territory. Veritas and Thorne proposed a solution: a joint observation mission, combined crews, shared data, each species contributing expertise the other lacked. Their governments, already invested in making the xenobiology project succeed, gave cautious approval. The mission was a spectacular success. The combined team made discoveries about stellar mechanics that neither species could have achieved independently. More importantly, Zellner and Crete crew members spent 3 weeks living and working in close quarters. They shared meals or whatever equivalent their physiologies required. They told stories about their homes. They argued about methodology and laughed at mistakes and bonded over the shared experience of scientific exploration. When they returned to their respective territories, they brought more than data. They brought relationships, friendships, the beginnings of genuine cultural exchange. Sarah tracked the mission's impact through social networks and news coverage. The narrative is shifting, she told Marcus. 3 months ago, the dominant story was, will the ceasefire hold? Now it's, what else might be possible? People are starting to imagine cooperation instead of conflict. That's the goal, Marcus said. Change what seems normal. Make peace feel inevitable instead of impossible. The Galactic Council convened a special session 1 standard year after Marcus's initial presentation. This time, he wasn't the one requesting an audience. The council summoned him to provide an update on the peace process. The chamber was more crowded than before. Word had spread that something unusual was happening in a remote sector. The Zellner and Crete, enemies for longer than many species had been spacefaring, were actually cooperating. Delegates wanted to understand how a primitive species, like humanity, had accomplished what the galaxy's major powers had considered impossible. Ambassador Chun, the Vraxian Supreme Commander, began, his tone notably less condescending than their first meeting. Your negotiation framework has achieved preliminary success. The ceasefire holds. Joint projects proceed. Some council members are impressed, though others remain skeptical, added a delegate from the Taurian sovereignty, a species known for their aggressive expansionism. A year of peace after 43 cycles of war proves nothing. Old conflicts have a way of reigniting. Marcus stood at the same podium where he'd first presented his ideas. You're right to be skeptical. This is fragile. The peace could collapse tomorrow if either side decides the cost of maintaining it exceeds the benefits. But let me share something most of you haven't seen. He transmitted data to the Council's displays. Economic indicators from both the Zellner hegemony and Crete collective. In the past year, civilian economic activity has increased by 12% in Zellner space and 15% in Crete territory. Military expenditures have decreased by 8% and 7% respectively. Small changes, but significant. Both populations are experiencing tangible benefits from peace. Sarah, attending as his assistant, added, more importantly, political polling shows shifting attitudes. Among younger demographics in both civilizations, support for continuing the war has dropped below 30%. Most citizens now favor expanded cooperation, even if they remain wary of their former enemies. Public opinion is malleable, the Taurian delegate objected. One terrorist attack, one border incident, one demagogue exploiting old grievances, and that support evaporates. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But every day the peace holds, it becomes a little harder to break. Every J.